Welcome to the Microscopists, a bite-sized bio podcast, hosted by Peter O'Toole, sponsored by Zeiss Microscopy. Today on the Microscopists.
Today on the Microscopists, I'm joined by Mark Bray of Novartis and Ryder of the Carpenter Lab at the Broad Institute, and we'll be discussing creating healthy working cultures.
I really believe that we should just be supporting people to be making the decisions that feel best for their whole lives.
Why Mark was actually happy leaving the wet lab behind.
You love on the cells, and then it's just up and die because you didn't do the right dance, or the moon is in the wrong phase, or what have you.
Why the move from academia to industry isn't as scary as it first seems.
So culturally speaking, I was wondering if there was going to be a huge shift, and that was worrisome, but it turned out to be not much of a shift at all.
And what does Pearl like to do to relax?
I think I have to admit that my secret is probably that I love reading trashy romance novels. That's the real secret.
All in this episode of The Microscopists. Hi, I'm Peter O'Toole, and on this episode of The Microscopists, I'm joined by Mark Bray from Novartis and Pearl Ryder from the Broad Institute. So welcome both of you.
Thank
Happy to be
you.
here.
Hello.
This is a bit different to usual because you're both relatively early career scientists. Relatively, I said Mark, relatively. And actually both have one thing in common, which is you've both been in or working with Anne Carpenter in the past. So actually, I'd like to introduce yourselves. So Mark, hello, this is Pearl. Pearl, this is to Mark. So I don't think you joined, you overlapped, did you?
Not at all.
That's
So it's the first time we met each other.
That's right. I came out in 2016.
And Pearl, when did you start?
And I started in September 2020, so quite
Okay.
recently, only about 9 months ago.
Okay, so Pearl, where were you before you joined the lab?
Well, so I do have a relatively, it feels like to me now, a long training history. So I have been based at Emory University since my undergrad, essentially. I initially went and joined an MD program at Emory. And then within the first month, I asked so many questions of my professors that they said to me, like, are you in the PhD program? That eventually I added on a PhD and did a PhD in cell biology at Emory. And from there, I did a year of training in psychiatry at Emory, and then decided not to focus on the clinical work and did a postdoc at Emory in cell biology and genetics as well. And then finally decided to switch institutions and have joined Anne Carpenter's group for a second postdoc, this one focused on image analysis, analyzing microscopy images. So that's the 1-2 minute version of my training and where I came from.
So I've got to note, you were always at the same place. And do you know what? Quite often that's frowned upon.
Mm-hmm.
They say, you should never do your undergraduate and your PhD and then your postdoc all at the same place. But you've done that. So
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
It's really mixed. I did it knowing that there were potentially consequences to my career and being a little concerned that, for example, if I submitted grants to NIH, I might not be considered to have as strong a training potential and may not get the grant because of that. But for my personal life, it was the right decision at every step of the way. And so I just decided that I really wanted to be surrounded by this community that is in Atlanta, and that it would be worth it, that my science would benefit from me being happy and supported by my community. And then I just kept going for it. And I got the grants. I was able to convince them that actually the science was still good.
Yeah, Mark, what about yourself? What was your background before you came into Anne's lab?
Yeah. Before I get to that, it's interesting. My sister is in Atlanta. She went to Emory for her JD, and she never left. She's been there for over a decade now, so she has great things to say about Atlanta. But for myself, so my background, I went to been all over the place just from growing up to here. But I did my undergrad at Tulane, New Orleans, Louisiana. Moved on to Vanderbilt, Nashville, Tennessee, which I loved. So I got my master's there and decided to stay for my PhD. And finished that up in '04. Stayed for a 1-year postdoc to just kind of wrap up some things with my my doctoral advisor, and moved on to Harvard to as part of a new lab that was starting up with a professor who was a former student of my grad advisor. And so yeah, I was there for four years, and then from there moved on to the Broad Institute, and then from there to Novartis. So when I put it on a map, it's sort of this interesting trajectory northward towards the northeast, which I did not expect. I did not think I would be in Boston for as long as I have, but here I am.
I usually ask near the end where you see the future going, but I guess if you go northwards, I guess that's Alaska or beyond.
Yeah, it's pretty much either here and then, or like Iceland or somewhere. That's it. And that's if I keep a vector in the same direction.
I thought it was interesting just going back on staying in the one place. It sounds like it's quite addictive. And Mark, even you, a little incestuous by going on to someone who's very closely related to your doctoral supervisor. Do you think it's still such a problem to do that anymore? I know, or is it an old view that you should keep moving?
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't, let's see, it certainly didn't pose a problem, in that it was just a very different institution, different direction. So my grad advisor, his background was in physics, but he got a joint appointment with the biomedical engineering department, of which I was a part. And then Kit Parker, that was the person I joined for the postdoc, he went to kind of into bioengineering proper. So it's a very kind of two semi-related but very divergent fields that I went in, even though the genealogy is shared. So in that case, I don't think it's never come up as an issue.
Yeah, I'd say the same for me, that like for me, it has really not come up as a negative. People warned me against doing it, and I certainly got the advice that there could be consequences. But I have been deliberate about trying to select places where I feel like I will be getting, I was excited about the training that I was going to be getting. And the reason was because there was always something that was going to be new. And as long as you have that element, I really think that it can be okay. That is, of course, coming from a place of like relative privilege, that, my application may not be given the same scrutiny that other people's are. So I think it's also always a personal decision, and whatever people choose, I really believe that we should just be supporting people to be making the decisions that feel best for their whole lives.
I think if the research that you're doing is strong and your outputs are strong, that's what counts more than anything else. But you said about the privilege. Also, if you're in a reputable lab, it also helps. There is still that, I don't know, the business card on your CV that gets you at least into the interview stage quite often. So your scientific backgrounds, because I think these may be different between the two of you. So start with Pearl on this one. What did you major in?
Like as an undergraduate or?
And postgraduate, yes.
Yeah, so as an undergraduate, I was very focused. So I went into my undergraduate just like laser focused on medical school. So I was a biological sciences major. I then in graduate school chose cell biology because I liked thinking at that level of complexity, that going down to biochemistry and thinking only at the level of a protein felt a little bit too reductive for how I like to think. But an organ or a whole organism also, or even an ecosystem, that was just too complex for me. So I chose the cell. I focused on studying the process of endosome trafficking for my PhD, which is all about getting proteins to the right place in the cell so that they can perform their functions where they need to. But I really chose that for my advisor. I picked an advisor that I really wanted to work with for my PhD. And then for my postdoc training, I chose my first lab was a Drosophila kind of genetics and development lab, and also, rooted in cell biology, trying to understand how cells are organized still. And from there, I did so much image analysis during that first postdoc that I realized how much I loved that. And that was what kind of spurred me on to apply for the position in Anne's lab and move into the image analysis as my focus.
So it's very life science all the way through. Interesting that the clinical, when did the clinical bit, what, you were laser focused?
I was.
In microscopy and being laser focused. You were laser focused,
Yes.
and then what?
Right.
Just diffracted out the way. What happened?
So this was always a really interesting contrast for me, because I was, through undergrad, I was definitely pre-med. That was always the plan. And I think it's complicated, but there were personal reasons that really drove me towards medicine. We had a family history of having someone in my family who was very, very sick when I was growing up. And that really inspired me to see health and as just the most important thing that you could be working on in the world to try to impact people's lives. And that really led me to medicine, or that's how I got into that focus. But then the actual experience of doing medicine it was a mix. There were things that I absolutely loved about it, but then there were a lot of experiences in being part of a very, very broken system within the US that were just kind of soul sucking and so depressing to be a part of. And so I never felt like I had a clear vision for how I wanted the research to combine with the medicine. Like for me, they were like two separate things that I could switch and go back and forth and do, but I wasn't clear on how I was going to bring that together into a career. And it was never deliberate. I never deliberately wanted to do the MD and the PhD. I selected the MD and then added on the PhD. So there was always a tension there. And it was during my training, my intern year, where I was working as a doctor in a county hospital that was extremely underfunded, facing a lot of issues where my patients just didn't have the support from our society that they needed. And I think I got depressed. Like in hindsight, that's how I see it now. And I just couldn't go forward with that work. Like it was just draining me so much. And I didn't feel like I was actually helping my patients because I was so drained. And so I decided to stop. I knew that research was something that I loved, and I felt like I could make a good impact doing that. And I just said, I'm not going to renew my contract, and then I'll figure it out from there. And eventually found my way back to research.
That was really cool. That's a really nice dovetail back to Mark, actually, because you chose the clinical side to start with because you wanted to help and family history. Mm-hmm. And yet I would argue at that point that doctors can only diagnose and prescribe. Without the drugs, I can't say they're nothing, because obviously that's a gross over exaggeration. But to have a profound effect, you need to develop the drugs and the medicine to help and to give them the tools, which is where Mark is right now as well. And actually, that's not saying, because obviously a lot of Anne's work and Self-Profiler are based around that market as well. But Mark, you were actually at the cutting edge of that. But what is your background? Because I think you're not so biological, are you, from the start?
No, so yeah, let me back up, and I'm going to go all the way back. So for me, like in high school, my mom was a nurse and my dad was a welder, and so my mom had various medical textbooks littered around the house, and I would just love to read them. In the natural world, had always been a big thing with me. So when it came up to the college decision, I remember thinking, okay, I like biology, I like math, not so much chemistry, liked physics. And this is in the 90s. So I'm thinking, like, what can combine all this into one nice package? And then I was hearing about this new thing called biomedical engineering, or newish, I guess. And so I went to like one of the, guides for, top schools in X, Y, or Z major. I think they still have this guide. They publish it even now. Found biomedical engineering, just looked up the top 20 schools and just applied to like the first few or so, plus a few local ones. And so, yeah, I came in knowing that I wanted biomedical engineering. Sounded interesting. At the time, many schools didn't have a de facto BME program. It was more like, you can major in biology and mechanical engineering and put them together. But Tulane was one of the several that had a biomedical engineering degree. So I went into that, loved it. Was there also with a fair number of pre-med students as well. And then at the end, I sort of felt like, okay, I've made it to the end of my undergraduate degree, but with BME, it's such a kind of, jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing, that I was like, okay, how do I focus into something that I can actually get a job doing? I'm not sure. Let me go to grad school and sort of punt the decision a little bit further down. And so with my my senior year advisor at Tulane, who was in cardiac electrophysiology, that was her specialty. She recommended the person who I ended up working with for my grad degree, and so went to the BME program at Vanderbilt, and got focused there, but hooked on with this professor who was in living state physics. That was his specialty. So cardiac electrophysiology, but kind of straddling this interdisciplinary field in best of both worlds. So that was 8 years, awesome time. Came out, and at the end, I was like, okay, so I have my PhD, I have my degree. Can I still get a job of this? I'm not sure. Let me do a postdoc and punt this down. You probably sense a trend here. So in this case, when I came up to Harvard, that was a real stretch in some respects, because as I remember, I had kind of two options at the time. I could either go to Harvard and sort of make the decision as to whether faculty was something I really wanted to do, which I wasn't sure about. And really, by going to Harvard, I'd really stretch myself, go all out and see if this was a lifestyle I wanted to lead. My other option was going to the University of Alabama in Birmingham, where I had another professor who I'd worked with as a grad student who was really great. So two very different, like both good places, would have been good labs. But if I'd gone to Alabama, I could have, lived like a king on the NIH salary. Whereas, I could go to Harvard and be a pauper, but it's Harvard. So I chose Harvard, partly, somewhat finance, but also to really see if I could really if I kind of had what it took to become faculty in an R1 type institution. And also as a chance to it was my first sort of hands-on wet work. Everything I'd done prior to was all computational. Now at Harvard, I was actually like growing the cells, doing the microscopy myself, and all that work. So I was 4 years there. And at the end, it was said, okay, wet work has been interesting, never doing it again. So, and then
the wet work or the computational?
The wet work part. Yeah. It's when you're growing cells and you love on the cells, and then it's just up and die because you didn't do the right dance, or the moon is in the wrong phase, or what have you. So that with computational work, if something goes wrong, chances are it's your fault, and it's pretty straightforward. But by the end of the postdoc, I was still in this existential crisis, like what now? Like I've gotten all the degrees. There's like no other place that I can go. And so it actually put me in a it was a stressful time figuring out what I was going to do. And I was also on the verge of getting married as well as engaged. A family was in the offing. So it was hard. And that's when I found out about the Broad, about Anne's lab, and then this whole staff scientist opportunity came up, which was something kind of a non-traditional route, which I had never heard of before, but it ended up being a great way forward. 8 years, awesome time. And then, without even necessarily looking for it, Novartis, a opportunity at Novartis opened up, and so I jumped on that. So I can go on further, but I'll hold off. Make sure that people get a chance to talk.
So obviously, Pearl, you were very wet lab based to start with not too much computational skills. Mark, you were very computational, and wet work obviously wasn't for you by the sounds of it. And yet you both landed up in the same lab. Okay, a small gap between you, but gone through it. It's quite a big change for both of you to go into one that is, Anne's lab cell profile is very focused. It's got a need, and bringing your skills to it and learning the need to understand. So Mark, in your case, understanding, I guess, the need to do cell segmentation, tracking, analysis, quantification. So obviously you know how to make the images. I would guess you've done imaging before, but now you had to get your head, I guess, around the analysis perspectives and how to make that work, not just applying tools, but to make and develop tools. How big a challenge was taking that step? Let's start with Mark this time.
Okay. Yeah, that was, so in some ways, when I was at my postdoc, in some ways I was doing a little bit of the image analysis development work that I did at the Bro, just on a smaller scale. Just for my lab, I was working in MATLAB, making UIs and doing some image analysis there, along with the wet work I was also doing. And part of my kind of really reframing, reconfiguring what my trajectory would be was really understanding and fully internalizing that the image analysis piece in my postdoc was what I really enjoyed. The cardiac electrophysiology part was fun, but it wasn't really what drove me. It was the image analysis part. And so at that point, I was able to say, okay, not my choices aren't so much where does my pedigree put me, but more what is it I really enjoy to do? And I started my search on that basis. And so when I got connected to Anne, it was such a great fit. Like what I still remember when I did my my interview, my job interview there, and I really felt like I stuck the landing. Like I knew this was like, this is where I need to be. And I had no issue like just sort of selling it. Like I just, you know, this is why I should be here. But I think one of the things I really enjoyed when I talked to Anne during the interview at the very end, she pitched it in part as we are a platform enabling science for others. And so there's this kind of almost, you know, missional mindset, at least that's how I heard it. Like we are helping scientists, we are scientists ourselves, but we're helping scientists do their work. And so that kind of, looking outside of yourself in order to help others, even, in this context was something very attractive for me at the time. And so I went for it.
Very much team science in
Yes,
a bigger,
very
in a
much.
bigger way outside of the lab itself.
Yeah,
Pearl,
yeah.
what about you going from wet into a less wet environment?
For me, actually, there's a lot of similarities with what Mark describes. So for my first postdoc, I did a lot of image analysis. I was also in a similar role of being the one in the lab who was interested in image analysis. And so I had my own images that I had taken of developing fruit fly embryos, and I kept running up against this idea of like, we really wanted to quantify what we were seeing by eye. And so I just throughout the postdoc over the course of several years, built my own program, like my own analysis pipeline built in Python in order to do that analysis. In hindsight now, I know I could have done it in Cell Profiler now that I've been in Anne's lab. But I really wanted to learn those skills. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I had a similar realization of like, this is the stuff that like I'm having to kind of like I literally had to set timers for myself during the workday to be like, no, really, you need to go up and like start that experiment. Like, and so when I joined Anne's lab, I had a few of these moments where I would be like really deep into thinking about an image analysis problem. And all of a sudden I would have a realization like, there's nothing else that I have to like get up and go do. I don't have a different responsibility now. And so it's been a great transition for me because now I'm part of a group within the lab. So I can learn so much from people with more experience than me. And I get to think about multiple different problems. So I can draw on the fact that my training has gone into many different places, and I have this MD knowledge where you learn a lot about many different biological systems within the human body. And so I love getting to think about many different problems throughout the course of a week or a month. And we do a lot of work trying to help scientists, even just on our forum where they can post a really short, small question about Cell Profiler. And I find it really rewarding to get to try to think about, I can think about how can I do this for the problems I'm thinking about, but I like trying to think about it for other people's as well. And I think that taps into that helper role, helping and being a bigger part of team science. But it also taps into some of the motivation for me personally, that like my personality lines up really well with that type of role, that I get a lot out of being in those roles. That initially drove me to medicine, but actually I'm finding it super rewarding as a way to express that within science.
I think something you probably both missed. You're both helping scientists answer a question, but actually, Pearl, you mentioned, and quite rightly so, that you spent a lot of time not in the wet lab and found yourself spending less and less time. I can go around our labs, maybe not the microscopy lab's always pretty busy actually, but if you go into the wet labs, generally they're not always, some labs will be empty at some periods during the day, because so much time isn't the spending time looking down a microscope, capturing images by whatever mode. It's the analysis that is the bottleneck. It limits on what we can find out from the samples. Secondly, it's the rate limiting step. It's what takes lots and lots of time. And things like Cell Profiler are what make things easier, streamlines it. So not just enables you to find out stuff that you need to find out that you couldn't before, but it speeds the process up to even do what you're normally doing faster. So you haven't got a Python program yourself, and it's just there on the package and you can use it. So I think it's a tremendous step forward. So I've got to ask, how's Anne as a boss? So obviously Anne's done one of these podcasts with us before, and she was utterly charming. What's she really like? Go on.
She's exactly like that.
Really?
Yeah.
She's really that nice?
She genuinely is. It's been an utter delight working with her. She's probably going to be like embarrassed to even hear this stuff after the fact. One small story. There was a cytoprofiling conference a couple of years ago, and there was a social mixer afterward. And I was talking to this one attendee, a woman who was kind of newish in the field, but wanted to get in, learn more. I think she was a postdoc. And I told her I was part of Anne's lab, and I said, yeah, if your interests seem to line up really nicely with Anne, let me introduce you to her. She's right over here. And this person I was talking to was like, would she actually talk to me? Like, I'm just a regular person. And I'm like, no, Anne would totally it was funny to hear almost from an outsider perspective, like she's a rock star. And so just telling this person, like, no, she's a regular human being. You can just go and talk to her. It's perfectly fine. She'd be delighted. It was just seeing the shock on her face, like, she'll actually just speak to me. So it's Anne is his in many ways informed what I look for as a manager. I'm not managing people right now, but if I were, this is the type of ethos I would like. And it also informed the type of manager I wanted for my Novartis job as well. Like when I started looking and stepped into it, part of it was the science that was the draw, but I actually asked Anne to vet my boss to say like, okay, does this guy seem cool? And this person also had a ethos in team building a culture, that sort of thing as well. And so Anne informed what I looked for moving forward in terms of my next career step.
So Mark, that almost sounds like, obviously they interviewed you for the post, and then you got your now boss to be interviewed by Anne, and then fans go, yeah, you can go, Mark. Can't be that complex.
Right. All sorts of machinery moving there.
And what about so Pearl, you're still in the lab, aren't you? I think I've got a picture somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Of you.
That's right. That's our team.
I'll step down a bit. It's a large team, isn't it?
It has grown a lot. And one thing I think that has been really smart about the way that the team has grown is that there are teams within the team. So we all work together, but I'm part of an image analyst team that is led by Beth Simony, who she's on that's her. And so she is the leader of our group. And so we have like a small team of about 6 of us, which is a really nice, manageable size where you don't feel like you're going to get lost. And then we're within the bigger imaging platform that Anne is the ultimate director of. And, you know, one just small anecdote about Anne in particular is that we were all having a lab kind of virtual get together. I think it was our holiday party. And we had as a break kind of icebreaker, just fun game, we had all answered different questions. And then the goal was to guess who each person was based on their answers to these questions. And one of the questions, he was like, if you had a magic wand and you could just like wave it, what would you do? And the response on one of them was, just make everybody be nice to each other. And it was instant. It's like, yeah, that's Anne. We just know, like, she genuinely cares about people and puts a priority on both, not only the well-being of the people within her lab, but also models it herself and prioritizes her own health and well-being. And I think that is extremely important, because I've been in many training situations where people tell you about, you know, mental health and well-being, but the model that you are presented with by the people who are the ones in power it's nothing at all like that. They're just stressed out of their minds. And so it's been such a refreshing experience since last September to be a part of a group that has a very healthy work culture.
I've got to, so I know Beth a little bit. Who's the better boss then? Anne or Beth? I should have asked you that before you swallowed. Sorry.
I'm going to decline to answer that. There's no better boss. Like, they work together to support us. So I'm just going to decline.
When we stop recording, you can tell me at that point. Mark, did you ever know Beth?
Yes, we definitely did overlap. I would also decline to answer the question as well. However, Beth is now sort of was elevated or promoted to the head of this group. And as soon as I saw that, I just immediately reached out to her and said, congratulations, like, this is just awesome for you. Because knowing Beth and how much she has helped with put the lab culture together as well, I can see that she would be doing a great, it's an extension of what she's already doing, and more. So I could see her doing a great job in that role.
So I know Beth from different conferences, and she's super easy to sit down, talk to, and actually really helpful. So I guess the same ethos is there, that she wants to help, has that community side, and always looking for other options. And Mark, I think I've got to get to the right one. This is one of your pictures, which is, I guess, an older lab picture.
It's an older picture. I forget what year it was, but this is back when we could still like do kind of team building. I don't know if the lab does this, even like pre-pandemic, whether there are outings that the lab currently does. But this was way back when. You probably don't recognize many of the faces. But it was a whale watching tour. So we just went to the seaboard, boarded a ship, and I don't think we saw any whales on that outing. But it was a lot of fun. Even though we're all in Cambridge, it's not that often we get to meet up outside of the lab. So this was one of those sort of nice opportunities where we could come, bring our families, and hang out. And the weather was awesome.
And what was this picture? This looks like a steel girder in a
So what was the issue there? So this was I forget where that so that's exactly right. It is a steel girder. People were encouraged to come and sign their names on it. I forget where that girder actually supposed to go. I'm assuming it wasn't, hopefully not too much of a load bearing structure. But yeah, it was just one of those things that the whole institute was invited to put your name on the broad, and so we as a lab came down and signed it.
So from going there, what was the biggest challenge of moving? In fact, just over your careers, what have you found the most challenging time? So I'll start with Pearl on this one.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's no question that it was the year that I was working as a psychiatry intern. We've set work hour limits for our healthcare system so that residents can average no more than 80 hours per week. But that's a lot of time to be spent. So I was working 6 days a week, and it's just really draining work to be faced with. Sorry, they're doing yard work outside of us. I don't schedule this, so I don't have control over when it happens.
Well, I did ask you what your most challenging time was, and you're finding it now. Mark, what have you found to be one of the most challenging times?
Yeah, let's see. So I'm trying to think the most challenging time. So I alluded to this a little earlier, just that time between the postdoc and the Broad, where it was just really hard in terms of not knowing what the next career step was going to be. It felt like so much was riding on what this decision was, and it just felt like the big unknown, and like just dark, and not knowing even which way to step or which way to turn. So that was definitely really tough. And then once I made it through that, things were significantly better. I think the other challenge was coming from the Bro to Novartis. It was a much easier, transition overall, because it's kind of a continuation of the same trajectory. But it was also my first industry job, and so not knowing exactly what to expect there. And I think I had certain stereotypes in mind, like from the academic side, it's sort of, from industry, it's all about, making the product, or, about the money, or, it's a business, at the end, whereas we're in the, the Broad, we're in the altruistic nonprofit world. And landing at NIBR and finding out that it's not at all that, that way, that, it is very much about the science. So culturally speaking, I was wondering if there was going to be a huge shift, and that was worrisome, but it turned out to be not much of a shift at all. But the big challenge, I think, was being matrixed into a much larger organization, and just sort of making my way there. I was told at the outset from, when I landed, several people at Novartis said it'll take you 1 or 2 years for you to feel like you've made it, or you belong. And I found that to be true, not because people weren't supportive, because they totally were, but just simply being part of a large group of lots of new things to learn, acronyms, and all sorts of all that sort of business. It takes a while just to wrap your head around it. And so, yeah, after about 2 years, I'm like, okay, I think I finally got it. But a lot of that, the challenges there were ameliorated by having a really great, other great supporting scientists as well.
So what is your role at Novartis?
Yeah, so my role was, so I ended up in an in silico group, which worked on doing, high throughput screening for the most part. And so my work was largely image analysis based. They had a contingent who were dedicated to that, but another part of it was also just simply cheminformatics. So one of the, getting back to challenges, one of the first things I was dropped in on in terms of job was, pick these compounds pick a selection of, 10,000 compounds for the screen. I haven't had chemistry since high school. I'm like, what are these compounds again? What are they being used for? Where are the databases that I queried to get this? Where is anything? So, being able to get into this sort of chemical space and learn what was expected there, it definitely took some doing, and I finally got my footing. But I was, reading books and kind of getting exposed to areas of science that I just hadn't dealt with for for a long time. So that was another challenge. But as it stands right now, I do some of both. It's still very much image analysis focused. Cell painting is a large part of what I'm doing at NIBR, but also in some ways it's much like at the Broad. I'm helping people in various disease areas with their image analysis questions, and the model is much the same. They approach us, we interact, we collaborate, and it's not just simply about, here's a pipeline, one and done. It's about coming alongside them as they carry on with their research as well, and also expanding a bit more into the chemical space. I'm still called upon to do, hit calling, compound selection. What should we run for the screen? What are the compounds that make the most sense? It's kind of those sort of decisions as well.
So can I ask, you may not be able to answer everything, what diseases have you been called on to help with?
Mm-hmm. So let's see. Yeah, those are the sort of things I can probably speak just mostly generally, but Novartis as a whole, it in some ways I wouldn't say mirrors the Broad. So we have disease areas in oncology, musculoskeletal, cardiac, CVM, neuroscience, and let's see, immuno-oncology. Basically, all the different disease areas, we have a separate group for, and I operate within a large hub called chemical biology and therapeutics. So with that sort of model, I don't think there has been any disease area that I haven't worked in by this area. And I would love to be able to point to, like, here's a therapeutic that's on the market because of something I did, but the pipeline is so long, as I'm sure as you know, like a decade or more, that there's nothing I can put my name to yet, but maybe, wait a few more years.
Wait a minute. They came out with a vaccine within a year. What's taking them so long? It's
so
just
long. Yeah, it's definitely lit a fire now. It's like, yeah, what's our problem?
But, yeah, maybe more big money will go behind certain exactly. aspects, maybe to speed these things up. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Remind me the hub, what the name of the hub was again?
So CBT, chemical biology and therapeutics. It's
and you were surprised at having to learn about chemicals with that name.
Exactly. I should. Well, that was so that was formed after I got there. But beforehand, the group I was part of was the CPC, Chemical and Proteomics Center, still chemical. So I really should have known.
and Pearl, how's your background going? Is that quieting down?
No, they're still going. They're a little further away at least, but
after the challenges, you just heard, so you were in medicine to help. You're now hearing how Mark is playing a very central role, kind of at the cutting edge now of delivering that side. Do you ever see yourself moving from the sort of the more fundamental research, which then feeds up to Novartis? All the pharmaceuticals benefit from that fundamental basic science, and who knows where it's going to lead. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's where you are now, but also designing tools that Mark will be using and carry on to use. Do you ever see yourself moving out of academia and going into large pharma or similar?
I could see that. I think there's a lot of power at large pharma to be able to effect change. And one of the things I think that I have been trained through, I've also had that experience of being within academia, and there's a lot of anti-pharma kind of like culture around people who are doing basic science, and those were the people who were training me. And I think it's taken me a lot of time to think about that at a more nuanced level and realize that, if you just write off this huge sector, you're potentially missing incredible opportunities. And so one of the things that I have really liked about my role in Anne's group is the fact that we do collaborate with pharmaceutical companies, also with academic labs. Like currently we're straddling the border, but I think that has really opened my eyes to the fact that there is a lot of potential in that world. So I could see that being a next step for me. And I love that it would draw on my clinical knowledge. Like that is something that the more I get to tap into that, the happier I am. Like I do love having that as an aspect of my work. It's been great.
I think it's brilliant. It's just thinking about it now. Isn't it wonderful that we've got microscopes, we've got analysis, we've got clinicians, we've got large pharma, how they all are needed to work together and all form part of the picture, really. Without any single component, it all falls down. You can't finish the jigsaw without each partner within it. So I can't understand the attitude that large pharma is not a good thing, because without it, who's going to make the drugs? How's it going to be rolled out? It becomes very inefficient.
Right.
Startups are great, and don't get me wrong about that, but ultimately they're very inefficient at scaling up because they haven't got the cogs to turn it. It's all part of the same system, really. You were saying, Pearl, before about the most difficult time, and you said you were cycling to work and you were using that. I think that's where we left you on that question.
Yeah, you were asking about coping through the difficult times. And for me, the fact that I was based in Atlanta was very helpful because I had a large community around me here of people that supporting me, my now fiance, and then a lot of our friends, plus his family was all here. So being able to get off from work and then connect with them was very helpful. And also I would cycle to work, so I got at least a little bit of fresh air. Yeah.
Tell me this is a picture of you mountain biking. This isn't your
Yes.
journey to work, is it?
That's not my commute to work. So that's mountain biking I'm mountain biking in Vancouver, Whistler, near the Whistler Bike Park on this really incredible trail that costs more than $1 million Canadian dollars to build, where you just climb up for several hours and then descend for like 45 minutes.
They spent $1 million creating a trail down some woodland. Isn't
Yes.
that what mountain bikers do naturally?
It has drawn a lot of people to that area. So I wish I could remember the name of that trail right now, because it's a good mountain biker name of something silly. Lord of the Squirrels. Yeah.
And I presume this is a picture of you biking in the snow now, also not your journey to work.
Also not my journey to work. So travel is another thing that I love to do. And this is me, I'm with my family. So it's a picture of us. There's my sister and her husband and one of her children, and then my fiance Craig in the background. And we were out doing some fat biking in Maine, where I grew up.
And
yep, these are the friends that I was talking about. So this is a group picture that we took recently after a dinner party that we have, where the idea is that every quarter we have a fancy dinner party where every household makes a different dish and brings their own plates and serving system set up and everything, so that it's not that hard on the host. And then we have a course by course fancy dinner.
So that was there. But I also, Mark, you talked about family. And you mentioned this, didn't you, about that difficult period that you were getting married, setting about having a family, which I'm just finding this picture. Here you are. I presume your family. You're
Yes.
not someone else. So how old are your daughters? Yes,
my daughters are now, let's see, almost 10 and 7.5.
And how is, here's a good question. And this, Pearl, you were talking about 80-hour weeks in the clinical world. How many hours do you both think you were doing when you were working at Rode and in Amsterdam?
Yeah, I think for me, I really tried to keep it to like a 40-hour, like 9 to 5 type of thing. And again, as Pearl mentioned, and modeled the culture, so that was not a huge deal. At Novartis, I've tried to keep it to about the same, and the culture is also pretty supportive of that as well. I think one of our issues as data scientists is that, as long as you have a computer and a Wi-Fi connection, you can kind of work anywhere, anytime. And so, at least for me during the pandemic, that has been a huge challenge. Like I'm in my bedroom right now. Like there is no work-life balance, strictly speaking. And so it's just, and I've only been back into the workplace twice in the past, since March of last year. And so the struggle there is to limit myself to the number of hours that I can work with family, like literally just a couple of doors away. It's interesting, like to tell my daughters that, I'm here, but I'm not here. Like when I'm in the space, I'm basically IT support for their remote schooling. But other than that, I need my space. So
you
it's been tricky.
Managed to balance that work life very well.
Could be better. And one thing, a question that's been raised is what aspects of the pandemic, of course, there have been a lot of negative, many negative aspects in terms of financial, psychological, emotional, spiritual, the whole bit. But in some cases, some good can emerge from that in terms of, here are patterns that were destructive before that I've had a chance to reset, and what can I take forward? And so during this time, I've been able, by virtue of being able to spend more time with family, there are certain aspects where I'm like, yeah, if it weren't for the pandemic, I would just be rushing out at 7 o'clock to get to work as I normally did, and come back for time for dinner and kind of grumble at the kids for a bit, and that would be it. But now I'm here with them, and our time together, especially in the mornings, have become much more rich. And so I'm wondering, as I transition back to on-campus work, what aspects of that can I preserve? Those kind of personal relations and connections that have been fostered over the past 18 months.
And the family have been happy to move with you. It's odd being scientists, quite obviously. It's a bit like being a traveling salesman. You're always moving, or quite often moving locations. But the family quite happy to move.
So in my case, I tend to be kind of a stick in the mud stay at home. So I mean, I've been here in Cambridge, and yeah, back when I was single, I could just move anywhere. My wife says she's more affordable, so I'm kind of the one who's this here. But really, when it comes to being at the technological scientific hub, there's like Boston, and I feel like there's California, although I'm sure even that's becoming more dispersed. And my kids are doing like the school system here and so on. So I foresee that I'll be here for at least the mid to long term. So, and I'm okay with that.
There you go, Novartis. Okay, you don't have to give him a pay rise. He's staying.
No, Novartis has been a surprising amount of fun. Surprised, yeah, definitely. I've been pleasantly surprised. There is a bit of me that wonders, like, okay, is it normal to spend your entire professional industrial career at one place? But many of my colleagues in Switzerland, in Basel, the mothership for Novartis, they're lifers. That's just kind of how it rolls. Yep. So
one for the Swiss.
Exactly. So yeah, if I'm at one place for the rest of my career, that's probably not the worst thing in the world.
And Pearl, you mentioned your fiance. I believe you are getting married on August the 14th.
That's correct. I am. It's coming up soon.
It's amazing what you can find out on the internet. To find out someone's actually married, I didn't quite expect that. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And excited?
Very excited. Definitely.
That's the right answer.
A week ago was super freaking out about wedding planning, but now I did a little bit more. We did a little bit more. It feels like, okay, we will have an event.
And how do you balance wedding planning and work? Because that's quite a demanding aspect.
Yeah, it is actually quite demanding. And this goes back to your question about work hours. I actually volunteered for an 80% time reduction in my hours for 3 months that the Broad was offering to people for pandemic related stress. I was finding that I was getting really burned out with the Zoom and the working from home and trying to be like on for 40 hours a week, but like it's all through the computer. Because even though what we do is computational, a lot of the work would still involve working in person with teammates as you're trying to figure something out. And it's definitely draining to try to then do all of it through the computer. So that, I think, plus the stress of wedding planning, I decided to go to 32 hours a week. And so I work mostly 6-hour days, which has given me a little bit of extra time for the wedding planning and
for
riding my bike.
And for recording podcasts, of course.
That's right.
I can say, hopefully, so one bit of advice I can give, so lame. I think the night before my wedding, I was still answering questions on the Cell Profiler forum, and Anne came in and said, "Don't do that." I had the sense that won't be a problem in your case, but just FYI.
If I find myself doing that, I will stop and think Mark told me not to.
But Mark, were you doing that because you felt you should, or because that was a good way to relieve your own stress?
It more the latter. I've been there long enough that it was just something I kind of enjoyed, and it was a way to sort of like, let me just do something that I know how to do before I venture into this next life change.
We've asked about challenging times. Mark, you talked about how much fun you're having. What has been, can you think of a moment, whether it be in the lab or on conference or something else, the most fun time, most entertaining? God, what goes on? What's the entertaining part in the day jobs?
Yeah. So there are several things I could probably point to. The first thing that my mind goes to is, as a grad student, for me, it was actually, I can't say it's for everyone, but being at Vanderbilt was a ton of fun. It was a great culture and set of people. We would do our work, go out, get drinks, get like, parties every now and again. So that's part of the reason why I didn't anticipate staying in Boston as long as I did, because I thought I'd go back to Nashville. I might take a faculty job or something there and be in this environment that treated me so well. So that's something I still kind of look back on as just a lot of fun in general. But the next runner-up to that would be, I think, in again, being part of Anne's lab and just being part of that community and culture. But aside from that, I think it's less about specific time periods of life and more about finding areas of enjoyment when you can, especially in the midst of a pandemic, with family and around and so on. You simply you eke out those oases of enjoyment and peace when you're able to find them. And in many cases, you don't just wait for it to happen. Sometimes you have to carve it out for yourself. It won't just fall into your lap. But I have to say, like, even things like just simply, sitting and praying, or just simply having moments of silence for myself. That doesn't fall into the traditional definition of fun, but it's meaningful and it's relaxing.
I don't do silence. Don't use it. Pearl, what about you? Fun time, entertaining, fun. What's at work?
Well, something that comes to mind, it is more challenging to do things virtually, but we've had some really, for me, fun pair programming sessions where we're working together on I was trying to write some tests to test a part of the cell profiler software where I had built in some new functionality, and that part was easy to build in, but then I was trying to write the test to actually make sure it works consistently, and the test, I just couldn't figure it out. And that was got really frustrating for me at one point. And then I brought in a group of people. We got together with another image analyst in the lab who does a lot of software engineering, plus one of the software engineers in our group, and Beth, who just knows everything. And we had just a really both fun and relaxed time troubleshooting that problem together. So we were all working through it. There wasn't a sense of this meeting's going to be over in 30 minutes and we have to get it through. It was just relaxed, connecting with other people and working on a problem. It was great.
So, thinking of fun, I'm going to ask some quick fire questions before we get back to the serious stuff. So I've got a few other slightly more serious questions to find about. I don't know who's going to answer first, but we'll find out. What's your favorite item that you own? Start with Pearl.
My mountain bike.
Mark?
Favorite item? Wow, I see, this gets back. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. I'm going to go with, I used to have this mug that I used to love. Unfortunately, it fell and broke not too long ago, but yeah.
What
not necessarily quite running from a burning building, I must save the mug, but it was something that I treasured for quite some time.
Okay. What's your pet hate? What do you really dislike? I'll start with Mark on that one.
Oh boy.
These are
loud noises. And not like leaf blowers in the background. Just again, I think you might get the impression, calm and peace is good. So loud noises are very jarring.
Pearl?
I struggle with people who judge other people. So then I judge people who judge people. It's those layers.
And there was me about to give you a 10, but I won't judge. What's your favorite food, Pearl?
Probably a Mediterranean style, like hummus and fresh vegetables and things like that. I love that style.
Okay, Mark?
Ribs.
Oh.
And I'm a full-on carnivore.
So. What food do you most dislike? Go on, Mediterranean hummus and vegetables.
Cilantro. I hate cilantro.
And Mark?
Liver.
Oh, I quite like liver.
Although foie gras is, yeah, I like that. So liver and certain, I think liver how my mom used to do it.
Kidneys have got to be worse than liver.
If kidneys are done right, they're not too bad.
Favorite drink? Go on, Mark, favorite drink?
Oh, favorite drink. Let's see. There was this coffee I used to love called the Accelerator. It was like 3 shots of espresso, plus steamed milk and whipped cream, in a glass like about this big. That's what's got me through grad school.
That's not a drink, that's drugs, but I'll let you off.
Yeah.
Pearl?
Yeah. Don't judge.
For me, it's like very strong ginger extract with lemon. There's a hot lemon ginger tea. It's delicious.
Okay.
And sugar in it too.
Favorite movie? Pearl?
I don't like movies.
Oh,
Clueless. I have to say Clueless.
okay. Yep. Mark?
Oh, favorite movie. There's so many.
Okay, favorite genre then?
Okay, I'll go science fiction as a genre, but one movie I'm very fond of is The Iron Giant. It never fails to make me mist up a little bit towards the end.
Oh, that's nice. And so, Pearl, you said you're not a movie, so are you a book or TV type person?
I like both. I like books and TV.
Okay, what's your secret trash TV that you like?
I think I have to admit that my secret is probably that I love reading trashy romance novels. That's the real secret. I can just devour them. And
Mark, do you have a secret vice?
Secret vice. No vices at all. No. Yeah. What vice or? Yes. Fortunately, I try to have a good relationship with the internet, so I try not to binge watch stuff. But okay, maybe close to The Amazing Race. My wife and I love watching The Amazing Race because it's like, we watching these couples do these challenges, and the two of us will turn to each other and say, okay, this is the part where if this happened, you would curse at me and storm out, or that sort of thing. So that's the closest we come to like binge watching as a vice.
Brilliant. I love this. 20 years time, when you're both the mega stars, where you're both the Anns in the world, we'll be back and we'll see if you still confess to those. How your taste changed. I've got 2 more things. Firstly, actually, the importance of internships. Internships can have a bad name sometimes, but I know that certainly, Pearl, you've done internships. Mark, did you do internships at all?
I did one as an undergrad.
How useful do you think they were to you?
So it turned out for me. So this was at Tulane. I went to the University of Minnesota for a summer internship, and that was in a neuroscience group, and that was the thing that got me interested in neuroscience in general, and allowed me to focus on cardiac electrophysiology when I returned for my senior year, and that kind of set me off onto that trajectory. So scientifically speaking, it was like the thing I was looking for. Like, this is something really cool that I can hone in on in this general field of biomedical engineering. But also the internship program was really good. It was a lot of fun, met a lot of people. So that was the other aspect as well. As an experience, it was also a really great time. And so both of those together were helpful.
So not only did you create a network, you got into networks quite literally in the neurobiology side as well.
Yeah.
And Pearl, what about you and your internships? Were they useful?
Yeah, for me, they were very useful because no one in my family was in medicine or science. My parents my dad ran a boat building shop that my mom also worked at. And so having access to that world as a young person was very helpful. And in a way, like, now I think your podcasts are also helping to span that gap where people can start to get to know the people who are scientists, even if they're not already a part of that group. And that to me is very important because not everybody grows up with access.
Which comes actually to one of the final points, which was Slack. And I believe, Pearl, you're the founder of the Future PI Slack peer group.
Yeah, that's right.
So what is that?
So that is it's a Slack group for people who are postdocs. Most of the people in the group are in biomedical fields, but it spans quite a wide diversity of different areas of research. And the goal when I created it was to make a platform where just people could talk to each other and ask questions and get advice, recognizing that compared to graduate school, when you start as a postdoc in a lab, you're relatively isolated. Like maybe there's a couple other postdocs on your floor, or you might get to know them, but it's not the same as going through a cohort of graduate students. And so I started that in 2017, I believe, and it's really grown over the last 4 years. We have,
Abby?
it's probably about 500 active members at any one point, but I think we're at more than 4,000 people who have signed up over the years and who are actively like a part of the workspace. And it's used by postdocs to chat to each other about questions they have. Is my boss treating me correctly? What do you guys think about this? Advice about faculty applications. A lot of people asking etiquette questions, honestly, about like, when should I send the thank you emails? Like, how should I address them? All those types of things that just you can not be sure of what you don't know. And it's a platform to try to help get some ideas out.
So again, back to networks again, and using those networks and making, that's a really good, quite an inspiring group to have set up. You must be really proud of how successful it's been as well.
It's, I just happened to be the person who opened up the Slack space and got the Twitter handle, but really it's the group, like it's the people who have come in and joined that has been amazing. And I absolutely am proud. Like, people, not me, have organized studying the faculty job application process to try to get more insight into what that process is like. And they've published papers about it. And also just, I see people being kind to each other on there every day. And that to me is like what I'm most proud of.
That's cool. I have noticed we are actually now over an hour long. Which time has gone far too fast, because I still have questions I want to ask you. But you know what? Hopefully, 5-10 years time, we can revisit this, because that would be awesome. And then I still have the same questions. So, Mark, Pearl, thank you so much for joining us today. Loads of top tips. It's been really great to hear about the difficulties in careers and changing careers. I love the way you two sort of you harmonize so beautifully in, Pearl, how you're making the foundations to make change, to develop the drugs. Mark, you're now taking those building blocks, taking that career, and now actually impacting to the end point. I think it's just amazing what you both do. So thank you very much from everyone in the community for everything you've been doing. And thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you everyone who's been watching or listening on whatever platform. Don't forget to subscribe and go watch Anne's for sure. And there's lots of other different podcasts. We just heard actually from Pearl at the end about the importance of networking and how a group starts to impact lots of other groups, not just the biomed. Chris Lintott, who did Zooniverse, go and listen to his and just see how you can also get involved, no matter who you are, what you do, in helping science, which comes back to helping Mark, the drug developments, and helping all of us. So on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Microscopists, a bite-sized bio podcast sponsored by Zeiss Microscopy. To view all audio and video recordings from this series, please visit bitesizebio.com/the-microscopists.